Why does the brilliant surgeon lose his retirement savings to a get-rich-quick scheme? Why does the MIT graduate max out credit cards chasing cryptocurrency dreams? Why do the very minds that can unravel complex equations, decode human behavior, and solve problems that baffle others? Why do these same minds crumble when faced with a simple investment decision? You've witnessed it. Maybe you've lived it. The uncomfortable truth that intelligence offers no protection against catastrophic money mistakes. In fact, it might make you more vulnerable to them. Picture this: a chess grandmaster can calculate 20 moves ahead, anticipate every possible counterattack, and navigate the most intricate strategic battles. Yet this same person hands over thousands to a financial advisor selling overpriced mutual funds, never questioning the fees that will devour their wealth over decades. The mind that conquers complexity becomes a child in the face of financial manipulation. This isn't about lacking information. Smart people know compound interest exists. They understand risk and reward. They've read the books, absorbed the theories, maybe even taught others about common behavioral finance mistakes. But knowing and doing, that's where the chasm opens wide enough to swallow entire futures. Carl Jung once observed that we don't solve our problems, we outgrow them. But what happens when the very qualities that make us exceptional, analytical thinking, pattern recognition, confidence in our abilities, become the chains that bind us to poor financial choices? What happens when our greatest strengths transform into our most dangerous blind spots? You see, intelligence creates a peculiar prison. Smart people build elaborate narratives to justify their decisions. They craft sophisticated stories about why this time is different, why their analysis is superior, why they've spotted the opportunity others missed. These aren't lies, they're beautifully constructed mental architectures that feel more real than reality itself. The overconfidence bias doesn't discriminate based on IQ. If anything, it feeds on intelligence like fire feeds on oxygen. The smarter you are, the more convinced you become that you can outsmart markets, timing, and human psychology itself. You've been right about so many things that being wrong about money feels impossible, until it destroys you. Consider the PhD economist who leveraged his house to buy tech stocks, certain that his understanding of market fundamentals gave him an edge. Or the successful lawyer who ignored every principle of diversification because she was smart enough to pick individual winners. Their intelligence wasn't their weakness, it was the weapon they turned against themselves. But here's what haunts us most: these aren't isolated failures. They're systematic, predictable. The same brilliant minds that excel in their fields consistently make similar types of errors with money. They fall for the sunk cost fallacy, chase losses with bigger bets, and let loss aversion paralyze them into missing opportunities that could change their lives. The reasons why intelligent people make bad financial choices isn't a mystery. It's a mirror. It reflects back the uncomfortable truth that expertise in one domain creates the illusion of expertise everywhere. Success breeds the dangerous belief that our thinking patterns, which work so well in familiar territory, will automatically translate to unfamiliar ground. The prison bars aren't made of ignorance. They're forged from the very narratives that make us feel smart, special, different from those other people who make obvious financial mistakes. We tell ourselves we're immune because we understand cognitive biases, because we've studied the research, because we're not driven by emotion like everyone else. And that story, that beautiful, convincing story, is precisely what makes us vulnerable. If you've felt the sting of recognition in these words, if you've seen your own reflection in these examples, then you're ready to push deeper. There's something transformative waiting in the shadows of this exploration, something that could change not just how you handle money, but how you understand the very nature of decision-making itself. Before we descend further into this rabbit hole of human psychology, take a moment to subscribe, not because you should, but because you're about to uncover truths about yourself that you never saw coming. And trust me, you'll want to remember where you found them. The question isn't whether you're smart enough to avoid these traps. The question is whether you're brave enough to acknowledge that being smart might be the very thing that's keeping you trapped. Your brain lies to you about money, not sometimes, always. Every financial decision you make, whether you're choosing between investment accounts or deciding if you can afford that new car, passes through an emotional filter first. Logic comes second, if it arrives at all. This isn't a flaw in your design. It's how humans survived for thousands of years. But survival instincts that kept your ancestors alive don't translate well to modern money management. Think about the last time you lost money. Maybe it was a stock that tanked, a business that failed, or even just overpaying for something you later regretted. How did it feel? That sinking sensation in your stomach, the tightness in your chest, the way your mind immediately started racing to find someone or something to blame, that's your emotional system hijacking rational thought. Neuroscientists have discovered something fascinating. When people make financial decisions, the part of their brain that lights up isn't the analytical cortex where logic lives. It's the limbic system, the ancient emotional center that processes fear, desire, and social belonging. You're literally thinking with the same brain regions that evaluate whether a stranger is friend or foe. This explains why smart people money mistakes happen so predictably. Your PhD in physics means nothing to the part of your brain that's screaming, "Don't lose what you already have," when the stock market drops. Your expertise in engineering provides zero protection when fear floods your system and whispers, "Get out before it gets worse." Loss aversion isn't just an academic concept, it's an emotional survival mechanism gone wrong. Research shows we feel the pain of losing money twice as intensely as we feel the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This isn't rational. If you flip a coin and win $100, then flip again and lose $100, mathematically you're back where you started. Emotionally, you're in the red. Watch yourself the next time you're about to spend money. Notice how your breathing changes. Feel how your muscles tense when the amount is significant. Your body is treating a financial transaction like a physical threat because, in evolutionary terms, losing resources meant death. Fear of missing out hits intelligent people harder than anyone expects. You see others making money on investments you passed up, and suddenly logic evaporates. FOMO bypasses every analytical filter you've spent years developing. The math professor who wouldn't dream of making an unsubstantiated claim in class throws money at a trending cryptocurrency because his neighbor is bragging about profits. Greed operates differently than you think. It doesn't feel like greed when it's happening. It feels like clarity, like finally seeing an opportunity others are too cautious or too stupid to recognize. The emotional decision-making with money disguises itself as rational insight. You convince yourself you're being smart when you're actually being driven by the same primal desire for more resources that drove our ancestors to take dangerous risks for food. Pride might be the most expensive emotion of all. When you're wrong about money, admitting it means more than acknowledging a mistake. It means accepting that your intelligence, your identity, has limits, so you double down. You throw good money after bad because selling at a loss feels like admitting intellectual defeat. Marcus Aurelius warned about this 2,000 years ago, how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. But try ignoring what everyone else is doing when money is on the table. Try staying calm when your friends are getting rich while you're playing it safe. Your emotions won't let you. The cruelest trick emotions play on smart people is making them feel completely rational while they're making choices driven purely by emotion. You'll craft elaborate justifications, cite research, build complex models to support decisions that your gut has already made. The analysis comes after the emotional choice, not before it. Status quo bias feels like wisdom until it costs you everything. Staying with familiar investments feels safe, logical, conservative. But sometimes the status quo is a slow bleeding wound. Sometimes doing nothing is the riskiest choice of all. Your emotions equate change with danger, even when not changing guarantees failure. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You can't think your way out of emotional reactions. You can't logic your way past millions of years of evolutionary programming. The moment money enters the equation, you become a human being first and a brilliant analyst second. But understanding this, really accepting it, is the first step toward financial wisdom that actually works. Your mind is a prediction machine, constantly filling in gaps and making assumptions to help you navigate the world quickly. This mental autopilot serves you well when you're driving familiar roads or performing routine tasks. But when it comes to money, these same mental shortcuts become elaborate traps that even brilliant minds can't see. How anchoring bias affects money decisions happens before you even realize you're making a choice. The first number you hear becomes the reference point for everything that follows. A real estate agent shows you an overpriced house first, and suddenly the second house, still overpriced but less so, feels like a bargain. Your analytical mind knows this is manipulation, but your brain has already latched onto that first figure like a ship dropping anchor. Smart people fall harder for anchoring because they trust their ability to adjust from any starting point. They think, I know they're trying to anchor me high, so I'll just account for that. But accounting for a bias isn't the same as eliminating it. The anchor still holds, even when you know it's there. How confirmation bias shows up in investing turns your intelligence against you in the most insidious way possible. You start with a hypothesis, maybe that electric vehicle stocks are the future, or that real estate in your city can't fail. Then your brilliant analytical mind gets to work, and this is where the trap closes. You become incredibly good at finding evidence that supports your position while becoming mysteriously blind to contradictory data. The smarter you are, the more sophisticated your confirmation bias becomes. You don't just ignore opposing viewpoints, you systematically dismantle them with logical-sounding arguments. You find flaws in studies that contradict your position while accepting much weaker evidence that supports it. You've turned your analytical superpowers into a weapon pointed at your own financial future. Here's a test. Think about your worst investment decision. Now try to remember what information you ignored before making that choice. Chances are, the warning signs were there, but they didn't fit your narrative, so your mind filtered them out. Sunk cost fallacy destroys smart people because it feels like honoring commitment rather than throwing good money after bad. You've invested time, energy, and capital into a stock, a business, or a strategy. When it starts failing, logic says cut your losses, but your mind says, if I quit now, everything I've invested is wasted. This is where intelligence becomes dangerous. You're smart enough to see potential paths to recovery, creative enough to imagine scenarios where your investment pays off, and analytical enough to build models showing how it could work. Your mind generates 1,000 reasons to stay in a losing position because walking away feels like admitting your analysis was wrong from the start. The tendency toward herd behavior in finances that smart people exhibit is particularly painful to watch because they pride themselves on independent thinking. But intelligence doesn't immunize you against social proof. It just makes you more creative about justifying why you're following the crowd. When other smart people are making the same investment choices, it doesn't feel like following the herd. It feels like validation. Great minds think alike, you tell yourself, not realizing that great minds can collectively walk off the same cliff. The dot-com bubble wasn't driven by stupid people. It was fueled by brilliant minds who convinced each other that this time was different. Mental accounting tricks your logical mind into making illogical choices. You treat money differently based on how you acquired it or what you intend to use it for. The $1,000 bonus gets invested more aggressively than the $1,000 from your salary, even though money is money. You're more willing to gamble with house money than your own, forgetting that once you win it, it becomes your money too. Smart people create elaborate mental categories that feel organized and rational but lead to suboptimal decisions. They have safe money and risk money, fun money and serious money, as if dollars carry emotional DNA that determines how they should be spent. But here's the most insidious trap of all, thinking you can outsmart these biases through awareness alone. Knowledge of cognitive biases in investing doesn't neutralize them. Sometimes it makes them worse. You become overconfident in your ability to spot your own blind spots, which creates new blind spots you can't see. Nietzsche understood this when he wrote, "The most common lie is that which one lies to oneself." Your intelligence gives you infinite capacity to lie to yourself in increasingly sophisticated ways. You can acknowledge every bias while simultaneously falling victim to each one. The truly unsettling realization? These aren't bugs in your mental software, they're features. They've been shaped by millions of years of evolution to help you survive in environments where quick decisions mattered more than perfect ones. But financial markets don't care about your evolutionary programming. They're designed to exploit it. Walk into any coffee shop near a university, and you'll overhear conversations about investment strategies from people who can't afford their morning latte. Browse social media, and you'll find endless posts about financial independence from individuals living paycheck to paycheck. Our culture has created a peculiar mythology that intelligence equals financial success, and financial success proves intelligence. This isn't just wrong, it's destructively wrong. Society tells you that smart people naturally make smart money choices, so when you make poor financial decisions, you face a brutal choice. Either admit you're not as intelligent as you thought, or convince yourself that your mistakes are actually sophisticated strategies that others simply don't understand. Guess which option most people choose? The culture around money has become performative. You're not just managing your finances, you're curating a public image of financial competence. This pressure transforms every money decision into a statement about your intelligence, your worth, your success as a human being. No wonder smart people make desperate choices. They're not just trying to build wealth, they're trying to prove they deserve their reputation. Consider the tech entrepreneur who publicly talks about disrupting traditional investing while privately maxing out credit cards to maintain the appearance of success. Or the professor who lectures about economic principles while drowning in debt from trying to day trade their way to the lifestyle they think their PhD should have provided. The gap between public persona and private reality becomes a chasm that swallows both money and sanity. Status symbols masquerade as investments in ways that would be laughable if they weren't so costly. You convince yourself that the expensive car is about professional image, that the oversized house is about building equity, that the designer clothes are about networking opportunities. These aren't investment decisions. They're psychological band-aids covering the wound of feeling inadequate in a culture that judges worth by wealth. The comparison trap has never been more brutal than it is today. Social media feeds you a constant stream of other people's financial highlights. You see their vacations, their purchases, their apparent success, and you feel like you're falling behind. What you don't see are the credit card bills, the family loans, the sleepless nights, the financial house of cards that supports those carefully curated images. Smart people fall harder for comparison because they've always been measured against their peers. In school, your intelligence was ranked. Your achievements were graded. Your potential was assessed relative to others in your class. This conditioning doesn't disappear when you graduate. It just shifts to a new scoreboard where money is the metric. Machiavelli observed that everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. In our financial culture, appearance has become more important than reality. You're incentivized to look successful rather than be successful, to appear wealthy rather than build actual wealth. This inverted priority system explains why financially sophisticated people often have less money than those who focus on fundamentals rather than optics. The education system prepares you to be an employee, not a wealth builder. You learn to excel within structured systems, to follow instructions, to optimize for grades rather than outcomes. This training serves you well in corporate environments but becomes a liability when managing personal finances, where there's no curriculum, no teacher, no clear path from effort to reward. Smart people often expect money to behave like academic subjects, that more knowledge leads to better results, that harder work guarantees success, that intelligence provides advantages. But money doesn't respect your degrees, your IQ, or your professional achievements. It operates according to principles that have nothing to do with traditional measures of intelligence. The institutional pressure to maintain appearances while building wealth creates impossible tensions. You need to look successful to access opportunities, but looking successful often prevents you from becoming actually successful. The lifestyle inflation that comes with climbing professional ladders can trap you in a cycle where higher income leads to higher expenses, leaving you more financially vulnerable despite appearing more successful. Perhaps most damaging is how our culture conflates complexity with sophistication. Simple financial strategies, boring index funds, basic budgeting, living below your means, feel unsophisticated to brilliant minds. You're drawn to complex investment strategies, exotic financial instruments, and elaborate schemes not because they work better, but because they feel more worthy of your intelligence. The truth about money that our culture desperately wants to hide. Financial success has more to do with behavior than brilliance, more to do with consistency than creativity, more to do with patience than intelligence. This isn't the message society wants to hear, because it means having strong financial literacy doesn't guarantee you'll avoid every pitfall. It's won by the most disciplined ones. And real discipline doesn't care how smart you are. You've traveled this far into the labyrinth of human psychology and financial folly. You've seen how intelligence can become a trap, how emotions override logic, how cognitive biases blind even the most analytical minds, and how society's myths about money success lead brilliant people astray. But what lies at the center of this maze isn't what you expected. The ultimate truth isn't that smart people are doomed to financial failure. It's not that intelligence is worthless in money management. It's something far more profound and far more hopeful. The very awareness of your psychological vulnerabilities becomes your greatest financial asset, but only if you wield that awareness correctly. Most people who discover behavioral finance make a fatal error. They think understanding their biases will automatically protect them, like knowing about germs prevents illness. This misses the deeper reality. You cannot think your way out of psychological traps, but you can build systems that protect you from your own mind. The ancient Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius didn't trust his emotions to guide wise decisions. He created principles and practices that functioned regardless of how he felt. He knew that discipline isn't about feeling disciplined. It's about acting disciplined when you feel anything but. Your intelligence becomes a financial superpower when you stop trying to be smarter than markets and start being smarter about your own psychology. This means building what I call psychological circuit breakers, automatic systems that interrupt your decision-making process when emotions run high or when you're about to make choices your future self will regret. Successful smart investors don't trust their brilliant minds to make perfect decisions in the moment. Instead, they make their important financial choices when they're calm, rational, and not under pressure. Then they create mechanisms, automatic investments, preset selling rules, waiting periods for major purchases, that execute those decisions regardless of how they feel later. This is why the most financially successful people often use surprisingly simple strategies. It's not because they lack sophistication, it's because they understand that sophistication is the enemy of consistency, and consistency is the foundation of wealth building. The sunk cost fallacy stops controlling your choices when you decide in advance how much you're willing to lose on any investment. Loss aversion loses its power when you automate your investing so you never have to feel the pain of each individual purchase. Overconfidence bias becomes irrelevant when you diversify across assets you don't understand rather than concentrating in areas where you think you have an edge. But here's the revelation that changes everything. Your intelligence doesn't make you worse at money. It makes you better at building systems that compensate for human psychology. You can design your financial life like an engineer designs a bridge, with redundancies and safety margins that account for stresses you can't predict. The most successful investors aren't those who make perfect decisions. They're those who make fewer devastating mistakes. They understand that wealth building isn't about optimizing every choice. It's about avoiding choices that can destroy years of progress in moments of emotional intensity. This is where your intelligence finally becomes an advantage. You're smart enough to recognize that you're not smart enough to predict markets, time investments perfectly, or overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming through willpower alone. This recognition, this intellectual humility, is the beginning of financial wisdom. True financial mastery emerges not from controlling your emotions, but from building a financial life that works despite your emotion. It's not about becoming a perfectly rational decision maker. It's about creating systems that make rational decisions for you. This irrational investing behavior that plagues smart people doesn't disappear through awareness. It disappears through design. When you automate your investing, you never have to wrestle with whether now is the right time to buy. When you predetermine your risk levels, you never have to make those decisions under pressure. When you build waiting periods into major purchases, you give your rational mind time to override your emotional impulses. Your journey toward financial wisdom isn't about becoming someone different. It's about accepting who you are and building a financial structure that works with your psychology rather than against it. The same analytical abilities that led you into financial traps can design systems that lead you out. But systems without self-knowledge are just complex ways to make the same mistakes. The deepest level of financial wisdom combines understanding behavioral patterns with systematic implementation. You need to know why you make poor choices and build safeguards that prevent those choices from destroying your future. This isn't about perfection. It's about progress. Every system you build that removes one emotional decision from your financial life moves you closer to wealth that compounds over time rather than evaporating in moments of psychological weakness. The ultimate irony? The smartest financial move intelligent people can make is often the simplest one. Not because simple is easy, but because simple is sustainable. Not because simple lacks sophistication, but because simple accounts for the complex reality of human psychology. Your intelligence becomes your ally when you stop trying to outsmart everyone else and start trying to outwit your future self. The version of you that will be afraid when markets crash, greedy when investments soar, and overconfident when early success makes you feel invincible. That future self is coming. The question is, are you building systems now that will protect them from themselves? What's your biggest money mistake that felt brilliant at the time? Share your story in the comments, not for judgment, but for recognition. Because the path to financial wisdom starts with admitting that being smart about everything else doesn't automatically make us smart about money. And that admission isn't a weakness, it's the beginning of true strength.